Chutzpah Girls includes 100 stories of Jewish women from throughout history. And each story is accompanied by an original portrait by a Jewish female artist from around the world. The stories span all of Jewish history from the Torah, the Tanakh, the Talmud era, all the way through today. We are so excited to be speaking with you, Diverse Jewish Books, because this is a book that is very much in celebration of Jewish diversity, of the diversity of the Jewish experience and of Jewish women. The women who are included in the book come from over 30 different countries. They're diverse in every way that you could define diversity. And they span professional fields and life experiences. And while they're all chutzpah girls, we would be the first to tell you there isn't one way to be a chutzpah girl. So we're excited to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
So maybe I'll start by reading you the definition and then we can discuss it. I'll just give you a little sneak peek of the book and the cover, what it looks like. And I'm going to open to how we start the book, which is the definition of chutzpah. So this is how we defined it. A Jewish superpower, the daring to speak when silenced, to take action when others won't, to try when they say it's impossible, to persevere in times of doubt, to be yourself when it's easier to conform, to stand tall when made to feel small, to believe when it all feels hopeless, and to shine your light in the face of darkness. And we continue with a quote from the Talmud, which is actually the only time we found the word chutzpah mentioned in Jewish sources. And the quote goes, Rabbi Zera said, "Come and see what chutzpah the land of Israel has, that it produces fruit in barren land." And I think for us, that really summed it up so beautifully, that audacity to just blossom and shine in the harshest of conditions, which is something that women had to overcome throughout history, facing double discrimination as women and as Jews. But I think you highlighted a really important point, which is that one type of chutzpah, and there isn't one type of chutzpah girl. And I think that's reflected also in the diversity of the stories that we see in the book. They're all different women with different backgrounds, different strengths, and different areas of different fields of contribution. And the goal for us was really to encourage girls and women to connect to their own chutzpah. I think sometimes as women, we're so conditioned to please and to do what others expect of us. It's really hard to connect to our own voice, to our own chutzpah, and to have the courage to show up in the world doing what is right for us. And so that is how we define it and what we hope people will take from the book.
I think it changed in the sense that the world around us was changing as the book was being researched and written. Tami and I both live in Israel. I live in Jerusalem. Tami is in Tel Aviv. And as we were working on the book, many things happened that affect all of us. First, it was Corona, and then it was new babies for both of us. We had our maternity leaves, and then more recently, of course, October 7th. And so I think that there was chutzpah happening on many levels. We needed chutzpah just to push this book through in the midst of a very challenging environment. And we also started to connect to our chutzpah as we came to understand the role that Jewish women played in the arc of Jewish history, that it was really Jewish women who were the through line of our story. Jewish women who met, as Tami said, discrimination as women, discrimination as Jews, and met dark moments very similar to the one that Jews are facing right now all over the world. And they met those challenges head on with audacity, with courage, with creativity, with strength, and with chutzpah. And they went on to live lives sometimes in very ordinary ways by simply choosing to live and to love and to marry and to have children and to raise families in times of great challenge. And sometimes they went on and did what we might consider really extraordinary things. They revolutionized their fields. They made tremendous professional contributions. They created new fields. And so I think that chutzpah, our understanding of chutzpah and the importance of chutzpah changed. And I think that it also strengthened our own sense of chutzpah as we were walking through these very challenging times, knowing that we've been here before. And when you walk through the world with Jewish women by your side, on your shoulders, you walk through the world differently.
It's a good question. At the end of the day, this is something that is very inherent here. I think when you move to Israel, you need, especially as both of us made Aliyah, we weren't born or raised here. And I think you do need that element of chutzpah to survive here, to thrive. Everybody has a very strong opinion on everything. It only enhances the definition and the quote.
For Tam and I, this was both of our first books. We've both done quite a bit of writing professionally in our lives. I previously was a professional speechwriter and continued to work as a speechwriter, but always writing for other people and other people's names. And this was a book that we just felt that needed to exist. We both had the same idea for the book, the same vision for what it needed to be, what it could be. We met by fate, and we wanted to will this book into existence. I think there was just a big learning curve for us to figure out how do you put out a book, how do you publish it, how do you research, write it, and market it. There were many changes in our environment that made publishing all the more challenging. When COVID hit, of course, the publishing world took a very big hit. We knew that we wanted a Jewish publisher. This is a deeply Jewish book. We approached Corin. They got it. They loved it. And then the day before we were meant to sign the contract, the first lockdown happened in Israel, and basically the book was shelved for about 2 years. We kept dreaming, we kept talking, we developed the list of women that we wanted to include. We began researching and writing. The book really didn't have legs until about a year and a half ago, when the publishing world opened back up again, and Corin reapproached us and said, "Let's go." And we said, "Okay, let's do this." And then since October 7th, of course, we've faced a whole slew of challenges. Tami and I, we were running back and forth to shelters as we were researching and writing this book. A number of the people who are involved in the book were also very personally affected by October 7th. We worked with Jewish female artists from around the world. Some of them live here in Israel. One in particular was displaced from her home in the north, and we're communicating with her about drafts of various portraits, and she's basically couch surfing with her family. And some of the members from the publishing side also were in and out of reserve duty in Gaza, now in Lebanon. So I would say that the process of putting out this book was replete with challenges. And I hope that will be an inspiration to all the budding and aspiring authors who are reading this book, who have books on page or books in their hearts, to know from firsthand experience, we can tell you that there's not going to be a perfect moment to put your book out into the world. No one's going to roll out a red carpet for you. No one's going to send you off on a glamorous 3 months writer's retreat without distraction while you write your book. You're just going to have to will it into being in the cracks of time with all your blood, sweat, and tears. And that's what we did.
Like Julie said, it's been about 5 years since we met and had this vision and started working towards it. And it was really met with so many challenges. But at the end of the day, we both believe that it was meant to be and that there isn't a better time to be publishing this book. We really feel that the day that we announced that the pre-sales opened on November 1st, 1,000 authors around the world announced a boycott of Jewish books and publishers. And we sold out the entire first print run within the first week of opening pre-sales. At the end of the day, there is a real thirst for these stories right now. People want stories of Jewish heroism, of stories that will allow them to connect with their families over the richness that we have in our heritage. I'll also highlight the fact that initially, for us, the goal of the book was really to rectify a historical bias, to make sure that the stories of Jewish women were seen and told in the same ways that the stories of Jewish men were throughout history. There's this added element of the world very much wanting to erase the stories of Jewish women. And I think that publishing now is just extra meaningful.
The podcast that you're referring to was the one that we recorded a few days ago with Shai Davidai. It's his podcast, Here I Am. And Here I Am in Hebrew translates to Hineni. It's a proclamation of spiritual and physical readiness to serve. And so we raised that with Shai at the start of the podcast, given the name that he chose, and to drape another layer of consciousness on his choice to name the podcast as such. And I actually really love the answer that he responded with. I thought it was very thoughtful. When you say here I am, when you say Hineni, the presumption is that you were not there before and now you are there. And I think that maybe it's true, and I think this is such a beautiful, we'll call this Rabbi Shai Davidai's Midrash, but that it really, women were there all along, and so they'd never need to say Hineni, and I think that's why we wanted to write these stories of 100 women, is because we wanted to make sure those stories were told, and we wanted to highlight Jewish women really from throughout history. We were not interested in a glossy sweep of achievements. We weren't interested in just a collection of biographies. These are stories of challenge. Each one of them zooms in on a moment of challenge in the woman's life. And when we talk about chutzpah, what we're talking about are different responses to challenge. And I think that it's so important to highlight this, especially for young women and for girls today who are facing so many challenges in their lives as women, as girls, and as Jews, and to say that this is a book that you can go to for strength and inspiration as you navigate those challenges in your own life.
These are really not biographical entries. We zoom in on this moment of challenge, particularly to highlight the fact that these women were not born or groomed to be leaders, but they chose to rise up and step up in a moment of crisis. And that is how they made their contribution, and that is how they made their legacy. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage and inspire within our readers too, to recognize, find that story that awakens you, that moves you, that enrages you, and connect to that. There's something in that that will allow you to step up with that same force and contribute to our long chain of history. And we all have the war that we're facing now, not just in Israel as a Jewish people, worldwide. It's waged on so many fronts. It's physical, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's mental, and we all have a way to contribute. And I think that is the message of the book, that we can all shine our light and we can all show up in the world with our unique purpose, as long as we connect to our chutzpah.
Sure. I think Tammy and I are both eager to share with you the incredibly strong Jewish women in our own families, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, who in some cases we had the privilege to know. The most beautiful compliment that anyone could ever give me is that I remind them of my grandmothers. My two grandmothers were as different as two Jewish women could be, and they both had their own versions of chutzpah. My father's mother was widowed at a fairly young age, about the age that I am now, with three young boys. And rather than wallowing in her fate, she decided to go back to school. She earned a higher degree. She became a professor of Egyptology. She studied and led tours and conducted research on ancient Egyptian history and museum studies, and was continuing to teach and to learn into her 90s. And my mother's mother was a Holocaust refugee from Germany. That story that I share in my bio was of her around the age of 15, when her father had been apprehended by the Gestapo, the Nazi police. And she walks over there herself as a young girl and demands his release on false pretenses. And ultimately, there was a lot of loss on that side of the family in the Holocaust, but she manages to make her way to the United States and rebuilds her shattered life, and finds my grandfather at a Jewish USO dance. And they go on to raise a family. She sold wigs. She was an Orthodox woman. and was a leader in her community.
I was very fortunate to know two of my great grandmothers, and they lived at complete opposite ends of the world, but both faced their challenges with chutzpah as well. One of my great grandmothers, they actually both shared the same name, which was interesting, Chaya Clara. One of them was a single mother of three in Seattle at the time, and she was one of the first women to obtain a driver's license there and open her own business. And she invested all of her earnings in ensuring that her children would get a very strong Jewish education. And at the same time, in Europe, my other great grandmother was fleeing the Nazis in Belgium with her young children. She was Swiss, she had Swiss citizenship, and so she was allowed to enter the country, which at the time was a safe haven for Jews. But she was Jewishly married to my great grandfather, but not civilly married. And so he was not allowed to join the family. And for 2 years, she campaigned every single day to let him in while he was roaming the borders in hiding in France. And eventually she succeeded. I don't know if you know anything about the Swiss authorities, but that's not an easy feat. Eventually she succeeded and he was allowed to join the family. And those are my own personal inspirations. But we hope that this book does the same for every single family, that it allows you to reflect on the stories of heroism and chutzpah within your own family and connect to them. For us, of course, it brought up a lot, not only in our own stories, but also in terms of Jewish history and Jewish backgrounds, the amount of anecdotes that you might learn about yourself and about your heritage that you're not familiar with are truly inspiring and greatly needed right now. Just last night, we got a message from a mom saying she bought it for her daughters and all of her friends. And I think Julie and I were both working really late. And I responded saying, thank you so much. It's these messages that make all the late nights worth it. But I think actually we got a really beautiful review from someone who had watched the podcast that we did with Shai Davidai, and he asked us a really interesting question. He said, why start in biblical times? Why include the matriarchs in this kind of book? And we had a whole conversation, which all the listeners are welcome to listen to on this podcast. But I think the main focus was that the strength that we have seen in the mothers that have risen from the darkness this year is unprecedented. And I think the entire nation on their shoulders this year. And we received a comment from someone saying how she was moved to tears when she heard us talk about the matriarchs then and why their values are so relevant for Jewish women today, even though they might not necessarily align with modern day perceptions of success and leadership. And I personally was very moved by that feedback.
And we made a choice rather than ordering the stories chronologically, we decided to do it alphabetically. And as a result, and you've had a chance to read it, so you understand the feeling of moving through history and encountering different women, often a biblical woman and a modern day woman, side by side. And our hope is that the readers will start to draw out themes and parallels and similarities between these women, that if we'd started with the past and we'd moved towards the present, there might have been this sense of moving through something that's old and dull and irrelevant to something that's more sort of colorful and vibrant and modern and relatable. But it was really the opposite of our intention. Our intention was that you should draw parallels between women of today and women that lived thousands of years ago. Chutzpah can be by the power of the pen. Chutzpah can be by the power of the sword, and it can be physical, it can be intellectual, it could be legal, it could be political. One parallel that I could draw is between, in the Tanakh, the stories of Devorah and Yael, who were both warriors. Devorah was a prophetess and a judge who led alongside Barak the Jewish people into battle, and it was Yael who ultimately took the sword of the opposing general and killed him in one foul swoop. And today, since October 7th, we've seen a number of heroines. A few of them are highlighted in the book, and one of them is Inbal Lieberman, who was a former combat soldier and then became the first woman to lead kibbutz security in the whole southern Shar HaNegev area. And on the morning of October 7th at 6:30 in the morning, she hears the sirens going off. She checks to see if she's getting any guidance from the IDF or from the police. She does not. And so she takes matters into her own hands. She goes to the armory of the kibbutz. She prepares a slew of weapons. She gathers a 12-man volunteer security force, and then she places them strategically along the kibbutz border fence, and then goes door to door in the kibbutz, ensuring that all the families stay safely in place. And quite remarkably, and also clearly skillfully, she manages to withhold any terrorist infiltration for over 8 hours. So you see, over the course of thousands of years, these Jewish women who are protecting, safeguarding the Jewish people in very similar ways, just only separated by time and circumstance.
And on a more practical level, we have the story of Dona Gracia Nassi, who was a Spanish Portuguese converso Jew who then ends up fleeing to Europe and ends up helping hundreds of Jews flee Spain and Portugal and saves their lives. And she was a huge philanthropist also, and her story is much broader. But the illustrator that was assigned to create her portrait actually belongs to a Sephardic community in the UK established by Jews that were saved by Dona Gracia. So even on a practical level, you find these connections, and these are, again, 500 years apart. You have these really meaningful connections that just continue existing throughout the book and the readers and the creators, and that was all extremely meaningful.
And this is one of our favorite questions to answer because there's the official title of the book, which is on the front cover, but there's the true title of the book, the informal, unofficial title, which is the Chutzpah Girls, the incomplete list of daring Jewish women, right? 100 is nowhere near a complete list. We have hundreds and hundreds in a spreadsheet, and there's so many more, but we had to narrow it down with the interest of ensuring that we could include, at least in this first edition, a really strong, diverse mix of women from all over the world, women that represent a broad range of Jewish experiences. There's Bukharian, Indian, Ethiopian, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Persian, and more. And we wanted to ensure a mix of women that you would know, your Golda Meir, your Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then, of course, plenty of women that you've never heard of. And we wanted to inculcate that experience of discovery and curiosity and surprise and delight of encountering a woman that you've simply never heard of. But we want to tell more stories of Jewish women. Thank you. We would love to do a second version. We would love to have this version translated into other languages. We would love to write short chapter books, and we have bigger plans beyond the book to share the stories to a broader audience.
One of the parameters that mattered to us at the outset was to include stories of women who are not incidentally Jewish, but who are really driven by the Jewish values in their life and whose contributions were driven by their Jewish values. And so that was definitely something that we thought a lot about while reviewing every story. And even in the more well-known iconic figures whose stories people might be more familiar with, the angle that we chose was usually one that reflected a Jewish value. There's also a glossary in the book, and every story also highlights a specific Jewish term that is then explained later on in the glossary. So we made a real effort to emphasize the Jewish elements in every woman's life. And in terms of the next steps, this is a generation that needs to be engaged. And we hope that beyond the book itself, we're able to do that. The stories are very digestible. The art is enriching and diverse and brings the stories to life in an aesthetic and creative and bold way. We hope to be able to leverage the art and have art exhibitions and tell the story through those exhibitions as well. We're working with a producer to turn the book into script for theater and screens. So there are many ways to tell these stories, and we welcome any additional ideas to help us shine the spotlight on them. We really try to highlight all of these different backgrounds in a way that would display the richness and the diversity. I think Dona Gracia is a beautiful example of these stories. I think a woman who was a crypto Jew, who was originally Sephardic, born in Portugal and Spain, and then creates this escape network to save hundreds and thousands of Jews from the Spanish Inquisition, leads them through Europe to the Ottoman Empire, which at the time was very welcoming of Jews. I think they recognized what productive members of society Jews were and how literate they were, and they really tried to welcome them. Donna Grazia is also instrumental in establishing and safeguarding the printing press, and so were many Italian women in the Middle Ages. And so a lot of the Jewish books that we have today exists thanks to these women who took that responsibility upon themselves in the Middle Ages. And these are really fascinating historical facts, which may not be as well known in when you think about more traditional Ashkenazi American Jewish history. And there are some contemporary examples too. But we're excited to have people discover all the different ways of being Jewish and traditions that they might not be familiar with.
And I'm happy to highlight a few additional ones. Donna Grazia is an excellent example. Shagar Araro, who is an Ethiopian woman. She was born in Ethiopia on the side of a road as her mother was walking by foot from their village to an airstrip where her family was rescued by Israeli forces, stuffed onto a plane, and arrived as a newborn in the state of Israel. And now she's a young woman. She's an Ethiopian Israeli activist, and she runs a community center in Israel focused on preserving and celebrating, highlighting the incredible treasure of the Ethiopian Jewish community and culture. Roya Hakakian is another example. She's a Persian Jewish woman who was born in what is today Iran, in a time when you were not able to be openly Jewish, eventually made her way to the United States, and now is a journalist, a speaker, a writer, and a very forceful advocate for free speech. But this is a window into other Jewish experiences that are less well known in North America.
Less well known. And I think what's interesting is also how they might shatter preconceived notions. We have this one story about Asnat Barazani, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in Kurdistan in the 18th century. You're talking about modern day Iraq. And she succeeded her father, who was the previous Rosh Yeshiva. He didn't have any sons, and he groomed her to become the next leader. And he even put a condition in her ketubah, in her marriage contract, that she would not be allowed to take on any housework out of respect for her stature, and so she could focus on her studies. And so I think it's not just about getting to know additional traditions, but also about expanding the way we think about other Jews in different countries and their contributions. Yeah, as you might imagine, for the more contemporary women, it was more straightforward, but sometimes more information is harder as well because there's so many angles to choose from, and the stories are quite short. They're 200 to 250 words. And so to condense all of that information and zoom in on one element of these rich and incredibly productive and fruitful lives. And then with the more historical characters, it was a lot harder to research. There's less information available online. We had to reach out to experts in the field, either for that historical era or specifically about that woman. It was definitely not straightforward, but fascinating what you uncover. For me, it's that we all have our way to contribute and a responsibility as well. We don't have to look very far. The stories are there in our own families, in our heritage, in our history. Let yourself be inspired by that and build on that.
And similarly, that every reader sees themselves as a link in the chain of the Jewish story. That's why we have a spread where we encourage you to write your own story and to draw your own portrait, because we want you to not only recognize that you've been seen as a Jewish woman, as a Jewish girl, as a Jew, but that you see yourself as part of that story, as someone who can contribute to write and to shape that story for yourself and others.
Thank you so much for having us.